All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Universal Man interview series. And today I am extremely excited to have Tanner Guzy on with me. And Tanner is a masculine style coach, and he's helped me out a ton in regard to the way that I present myself, the way that I understand style, all that good stuff. And really, he took me from someone who thought that style, especially from a man's perspective, was a dumb kind of waste, and helps me see that it's actually one of our most powerful forms of communication. And if you're doing anything with your life, then you need to be able to communicate. And if you ignore the style component, well, then you're missing a huge piece of power right there. So, Tanner, thank you so much for being here. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about this.
Most guys fail to build good habits because they're stuck in bad thought patterns. Until you recondition your brain to think new thoughts in the moments that matter, you'll keep ending up in the same old places over and over again. This is why I created the Metascript method. It's a free guide that will teach you 3 simple yet insanely powerful journaling techniques that, when practiced regularly, will reprogram your brain for near automatic success. I've read hundreds of client journals in my years as a professional coach, and I've identified exactly what you need to put down on the page if you want to create positive life changes that truly stick. And no, just endlessly writing about your feelings doesn't work. So if you want to learn my secret weapons of self-development, then click the link below and grab your free copy of the Metascript method now. Yeah, I think this is something that's really interesting for a lot of guys because, well, hopefully it'll be interesting for a lot of guys because it goes counter narrative to that traditional masculine stance of, style is for sissies, it's for women. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I think that statement in and of itself is already indicative of the fact that you care about your style. Because if you truly didn't care, then you wouldn't be that concerned about whether or not you're perceived as sissy or effeminate or whatever else because you put some energy into this. And so men have always cared about our appearance. You have men like Genghis Khan, who, as soon as he actually started to attain some wealth, stopped wearing these coats that were made out of the pelts of field mice and started wearing the golden silken robes of the countries that he had conquered. Or you have these tribesmen in the darkest and deepest parts of Africa who will wear masks as ways to instill fear and signal status amongst the men of their own tribes. Like, men have always used our appearance as, like you said, a tool of communication, and a super effective tool of communication, so that we can express things like our masculinity or our status or our ambitions or our accomplishments or anything else to other men.
Yeah, and that's kind of what blew my mind, and it went even further when you introduced the masculine style archetypes. I'm a sucker for archetypes. I have like 4 or 5 videos like on my channel where I'm just talking about masculine archetypes. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, wait, what? So can you tell people what is up with this? What are the masculine style archetypes?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll break them down. There's 3 of them. But before I do that, one thing that I think is really important to understand so that the idea and the concept of a style archetype makes sense is that a lot of guys have this kind of inverse relationship with their appearance where it's my clothes grant me an identity. And because a lot of us, when we're going through junior high or high school and we're trying to shape our identities, that's one of the first things that we do is we start dressing like the people that we want to be, or the sports that we're into, or the hobbies that we engage in. That's where you get like Tyler Durden saying, "You're not your khakis," right? And there's this resistance to this idea. And that's absolutely true that your identity cannot come from the clothing that you wear. It needs to be much deeper than that. But that doesn't mean that the two aren't interrelated. It just means that we've flipped the cause and the effect. And so really what your clothing should be is, rather than this external thing that then bestows upon you an identity, it should be something that you already understand who you are and the man you're building yourself into. And then you use your clothing as a way to signal that not only to the rest of the world, but most importantly to yourself, as a good kind of like reinforcement method of, am I on the right path? Am I sending the right signals the way that I want to be? So with that understood, then we can dive into this idea of the different style archetypes.
Well, let me pause you right there, because I think what you said is really important, and it actually ties in a lot to the stuff that I talk about. Like, one of the big things, and when I've talked about quitting porn and stuff like that, is that porn is like a status substitute. It's like you feel bad about yourself, so you get to step into this world of pornography where you get to pretend you're this big high status dude, right? And one of the ways that you break free from that is learning how to recognize that you have inherent dignity, and your dignity is separate from your status. Your status matters, but it doesn't impact this kind of fundamental worth you have as a human being. And I think you're saying that here. It's like, yeah, if you dress poorly or you dress amazing, it doesn't make you worth any more or less as a person. But what you want to try and do is honor that dignity, reflect that dignity, and the more you understand that dignity that you have, the more you honor it in all the little ways, everything from your clothing to the way you talk to the way that you conduct your business and all that kind of stuff. That's where it really matters, right? So it's about this sort of shining out of what's already good, not trying to get something you don't have. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes. Well, and I love that distinction because that's such a good way of putting it, because most people look at it as it's just this external thing. And I only have integrity because that way other people will want to do business with me, or I only dress a certain way because that's the way that other people will see my status, and then it becomes a problem. But it's not that. It becomes this very either virtuous or detrimental cycle of the signals that we send to ourselves, which is, if you do have some self-respect, if you recognize your own internal dignity, then why would you not talk and carry yourself and dress and conduct business in and have relationship expectations in a way that is reflective and demonstrative of that dignity, as opposed to everything else that starts to chip away at that and remove it and make you feel like, well, none of my actions actually align with the idea that I have any dignity. So why in the world would I actually feel like I have any dignity?
Right. And I think that, we study, ethics are more commonly discussed. We talk about morality a lot in life, especially if you have a spiritual upbringing or just are philosophically minded, and you can learn the mechanics of like how to behave in an ethical way that represents your dignity. But the mechanics of style, those are not taught as frequently. They're not as widely understood. So that's why it was like a light bulb for me. So tell us about the style archetypes then, because those are kind of the mechanics when you start getting into it.
Right. So the way that the archetypes are split up is, again, take who you are and take primarily the way that you interact with the world. So the three archetypes are rugged, refined, and rakish. And the way that this breaks down is, we'll talk about the rugged archetype first. These are the men who primarily interact with the world through physical means, whether that's you do blue collar work or you're somebody who enjoys hobbies that involve craft and you're doing things with your hands. You enjoy being out in nature more than you enjoy being out in the city. For a lot of guys that are introverted, this is this way where they'd much rather deal with animals or things than necessarily with other people. There's this rugged component, this nature, this physical aspect of it. And your clothing should be reflective of that, not only from a function perspective, that you should wear things that are actually conducive to that, but also from a form perspective as well. Again, because it reinforces this identity of this is who you are, and it sends the signals to the other men who are within that same archetype. The next one is refined. This is where
can you give us an example real quick of that?
Yeah. I mean, you could take stuff like whether it's lumberjacks or cowboys or blue collar workers or guys who are really into hiking and nature or anything else like that. Like, there's so many different ways that any of these archetypes really manifest themselves. Right.
Yeah. So it's like the guy who, he wears his cut off like jean jacket shirt, and he's got his Red Wing boots, and he's got his like patch on for his motorcycle, like, and it's just like, he could go from fixing his motorcycle to riding it, and it's functional, it communicates something. It's like on that rugged side, right?
Exactly. But even take somebody who's like a total gym bro, where maybe he's not necessarily super social, but he loves being able to control his body and being able to build it in a way that works for him, or he's a strongman or a powerlifter or something else. Again, he exists in that physical world. And we could talk a little bit later on about how the next step after archetypes is tribes, because we're already explaining that these are not the same thing. A guy who's in a motorcycle club is not going to necessarily see eye to eye with somebody who's a power lifter or a bodybuilder, even though they both embody that rugged archetype to a different extent.
Sure.
And so, but it's this idea of, do you thrive when you get to exist more in the physical world as opposed to the mental, the financial, the social world, or something else? And if you do, then you're primarily probably within that rugged archetype.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Thanks.
Next one is refined. And this is for guys who understand the way that society and civilization and rules and hierarchy and status, all that work. And they thrive by following that and playing the game the way that it's intended to play. So that's guys who, when you think about different manifestations of that, especially within like the financial or the status world. These are your doctors, your lawyers, your guys who are politicians, or guys who are in part of a ruling class in the old aristocracy or something else, because it's the people who whether it's through meritocracy or birth or anything else, they find themselves on top of the hierarchy of men, or at least upwardly mobile within the hierarchy, because you don't always have to be the top dog, but you do have to find yourself thriving and enjoying playing that kind of game. And you exist, you love rules, you love organization, you love structure. I'm that way. I'm certainly not at the top, but I like rules and the way that works. And so I end up falling primarily within that refined category.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if you follow Jordan Peterson at all, but his style like increased dramatically like a year into his public life, and he like seems to me he's the epitome of the refined style now. I think he has to have a stylist or something, because
he has to, because his stuff, it fits so well and it's so on point for him.
Right. Yeah.
And it does, because it is now conducive. I mean, what does the man try to convey? He tries to convey authority, credibility, respect, and especially within the world of academia and that kind of stuff. He is at a very high point within a specific hierarchy, and his clothing needs to reflect that. And now it does, and it does a really good job of that. So yeah, Peterson is a fantastic example of somebody who embodies that refined archetype.
Right. Okay.
Which brings us to the third one, which is rakish. And the rakes are the kind of guys who they understand those structures and those rules and those hierarchies just as well as the guys who are refined. But rather than succeeding by following, they succeed by breaking those rules, by casting themselves as separate. I'm outside. The things don't apply to me the same way. They don't apply to me the same way that they do to you. So this is where you get like rock stars and outlaws, and even to some extent hipsters or other people who they define themselves as being a counterculture, or I belong to, or I in and of myself am a counterculture and I don't have to go with the grain or anything else to that extent. And then they find social success, they find personal satisfaction by being more rakish and breaking the rules than necessarily by following them.
Okay. So curious about this. I wonder if there's a like fourth category for like the people at the super high end, like the Bill Gates and like the Mark Zuckerbergs. Like how would you describe them? Are they just like, do they have no archetype? Is it just like pure like I'm at the top, I can do whatever the heck I want to do, or what's going on there?
So that's one of the things that gets really interesting, because that's where the idea of style and status come in. And the higher status you are, the more you can bend and break the rules. Because for somebody like Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, who's actually improved his style quite a bit, they have such clout and credibility, not only within their specific, like their tribe and their culture, but even just within the world in general, that they can afford to do things that the rest of us can't. But another really good example of somebody who does that is Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter. Where his status within the UFC is high enough that for him to he doesn't have to wear a tap out shirt. He doesn't have to dress like all the other guys. And so he can get away with wearing these crazy 3-piece suits or these big old 80s glasses or these Coogie sweaters or everything, or even like wearing some of the stuff that some of the boxing legends and greats of like the 50s and 60s and 70s, he can totally replicate their outfits, because what he's signaling is I'm so high status that I'm with the legends, and the rest of you plebs are down here somewhere else where you have to dress like you think about it differently.
So if I want to be high status, I have to dress like them, right?
No, right? Because it has to be a balance of both. It's kind of like saying, if I want to be a really strong power lifter, then I have to put 800 pounds on the barbell and I have to lift that tomorrow. And it's like, no. You have to be able to balance where you currently are and where you want to be, and go with this concept of progressive overload, or gradually building yourself to that. Because McGregor, if he wasn't good in the octagon, then it wouldn't matter. And that's what's so funny to me when I hear guys say, well, Zuckerberg can wear whatever he wants, or Bill Gates looks like an idiot. And it's like, you're not them. You haven't made that kind of money. You haven't had that kind of impact. You don't have all the social capital that comes from all the things that these men have done, that they can afford to spend it frivolously on stupid outfits. The rest of us, I don't have that kind of capital. And so I need to be a little bit more wise with how I spend it. And one of the better ways to spend it is through your appearance and what you're communicating with it.
Right. It's kind of like if you're not high enough status to the point where someone in the YouTube comments is going to make fun of anyone else who makes fun of you. It's like if I'm like dumping on Mark Zuckerberg in a YouTube comment, someone's going to be like, dude, he could like buy your entire life. He could buy the entire state you live in. Right. And it's like, all right, fair enough.
It's our salary.
Right. Yeah. Right. So it's like, until you're at that point, you got to at least learn how to play the rules that match where you're at. Right.
Exactly.
So someone, are they purely one of these archetypes or another, or can you blend, or how's that work?
Yeah, that's what's sad is a lot of guys, when they start getting into this idea, they get almost kind of one-dimensional within it, where it's like, I'm rugged, or, oh,
Right.
I'm refined or anything else. And it doesn't work that way. You have a mix of all three. And that even changes as your life changes and evolves. My life, when I was working doing custom suiting, my archetype was way more refined than it is now. And that refinement has swapped out with more rugged as I'm self-employed and I spend more time up in the mountains and doing stuff with my family. And so not only is it a blend of all three, but you also need to be self-aware enough to recognize that it changes as your life situation changes too.
Right. Even as your environment changes, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's like you want to be constantly dressing for where you're at, like in your life, but also then what you're practically doing. If you're in a 3-piece suit and you're changing the oil in your car, you're an idiot.
Exactly, right? And most guys, they understand how stupid that is when it comes to wearing formal stuff in a casual situation, but these are the same guys who will still show up to a wedding in cargo shorts and combat boots and a Van Halen t-shirt and think, well, why should anybody care what I think? And it's like, no, dude, you're so concerned with signaling that you don't care that you're totally it's silly to me that we can see it going one direction but not the other.
Right, because it's disrespectful. And that's the thing, is like, if you think about this was the big light bulb for me, was that looking at clothing as nonverbal communication. And like, if you show up at a formal event and dress unformally, you're signaling that you don't care. That's what you're non-verbally communicating. And it's disrespectful. It's like, if you wouldn't go up and tell the person that you don't care about their wedding, well, then like, don't dress in a way that communicates that you don't care about their wedding. And a lot of this, I think, comes from ignorance, but still, once you see how that works, it's like, shit. Thinking about like the times I used to wear like just dumb stuff,
Right. And it's even then, because we can talk about these different situations, but yeah, okay, a funeral is a really good example, right? Where you just go, okay, well, yeah, you're supposed to wear all black to a funeral. And I made the mistake of one of my best friends, his dad died about a year ago, and I go to the funeral without really thinking any deeper about it. And not only am I the only guy there in all black, but I'm also the only one who's even there in a suit, let alone even like, nobody else even bothered to have a sport coat on. And so I'm the jerk who's overdressed and is making it more about myself when I'm there, even though I'm just trying to, show proper respect for my friend's dad. And so the thing that most men resent about clothing and it being a tool of communication is that it requires a lot of social fluence to be able, or social fluency in order to be able to understand that these are signals that I'm sending. Are they sending and telling the thing that I want them to? And are they going to be interpreted by the audience the way that I want them to? And when you think about it from the context of verbal communication, it's like, what kind of a moron shouts at the top of his lungs when he's in a library? Right. Or what kind of guest that goes on to a kids TV show uses the most like crass, worst language he can come up with, but we visually will do things that are very, very similar just because we don't want to be bothered with understanding that it requires some social fluency and you have to be able to be mature enough to recognize that these signals matter.
Right. And it's interesting. You're talking there about, you showed up overdressed when, theoretically what you did was on point. It's just that since it is, you do need to look at it as a communication. You also have to take into account who are you communicating with. Yep. And so it's like, you're not going to be using, high level vocabulary with like a toddler. And in the same way, if you know that your friend and his family, they're not the kind of people who dress up, that's just not what they do. Maybe they're of a more rugged style. Like I've got some good friends who, he almost got married in a, like, his denim trucker vest. And it's just like, it's like, you got to know who you're hanging out with and match it accordingly. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those ideas where a lot of guys struggle as soon as they start to improve their style. And I'm sure you guys who are listening to this have probably already thought at some point, okay, Mark's talking to Tanner. Tanner's a style guy. At some point, Tanner's going to tell me I have to buy a suit or I have to wear a button-up shirt instead of a t-shirt or something else, because we create this false binary of, in order to be more stylish, I have to be more formal. And unless that's the world that you inhabit, that is a terrible style decision for you. If you work in the tech industry and everybody else around you is wearing jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers, and you decide I'm going to dress better, and so you start showing up to work in a suit, you're an idiot. Right? And so A lot of guys have to be able to stop thinking in this binary of good style is formal and bad style is casual. So if I want to have better style, I need to dress more formally.
Right. That's a really good point there, because I think that's what people have defaulted to. And, you know, we get kind of the cheesy, you know, off the rack suit that then I would argue displays you worse than if you had a more dialed in sort of archetypally and tribally appropriate setup, you know, get up, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, you're kind of already hitting on it, but like, tell people then, all right, so we talked about the archetypes. What's the tribe deal?
So tribe is the next logical step down, where it's the groups of people that you interact with that have the most impact on your life. Because another kind of big complaint that I hear from a lot of men is, why should I care what anybody thinks about me? Why should I care if anybody does or does not like the way that I look? And unless you're a complete loner or a complete sociopath, then you interact with other people throughout your life. And to some extent, some of those people need to have the right for their opinion to matter to you. Now, for me to have some random dude who's in France that I've never met before, and if he leaves a comment on a YouTube video or on my Twitter feed that calls me a moron, it's like, I don't care, dude. Like, I don't know you. You have not earned the right for your opinion to matter to me.
Right.
But when it comes to my clients, or if you're working for somebody, when it comes to your boss or your family or a close group of friends or the person that you're dating and you're in a long-term relationship, you have to have some measure of, this person's opinion does matter to me, and it's not just my way or the highway on every little thing. When it matters with things like of morals, I'm not gonna abandon my moral principles, even if it makes my wife hate me, because that matters. I'm not going to abandon my moral principles if it means I lose clients or if it makes my kids resent me or something else. But when it comes to my clothing, that's amoral. And if my life can be better with my kids or in my relationship or with my clients or something else, and it doesn't come at the expense of how I see myself, there's no reason to not be fluid on those things and to recognize that clothing is now not just a method of communication, but it's also a tool, and it needs to be used properly as a means to an end as opposed to an end in and of itself.
Right. So let's talk specifics here. All right. Like, what are some popular tribes that, you know, people would be able to instantly recognize?
Work, what you do for a living.
Right.
Because again, if you work in the tech industry, that's very different than being a banker on Wall Street, which is very different from being in a creative field or being a plumber.
Right.
And as soon as I mention those different fields, you automatically start to picture what those men look like in your mind, and it probably has to do with clothing. Right? I don't have to tell you what those guys look like, because you already know. And so work is a huge tribe. Family's a big tribe. Hobbies and interests and things like that are a big tribe. You know, even like, let's say you go to the gym, and if you go to a big commercial gym, it's really pretty easy to tell the difference between somebody who like is really into CrossFit versus somebody who does more endurance training versus somebody who's into bodybuilding versus somebody who's into powerlifting. And these are all people who are interested in physical self-development, but the way that their exercises are different means their identities are a little bit different, and they all dress a little bit differently from each other as well. Yep.
Right. Exactly. It's interesting how you mentioned that, because that's how I've made some friends. It's like, all right, I see, you know, the people with the tight clothing and the chalk, and then I see the people with the loose clothing and the chalk, and I know one's a power lifter and one's a CrossFitter.
Boom. Perfect. Right. That's it right there. CrossFitters have really bold colors, and the power lifters, it's usually more cut off and ragged, and it's like all death and everything else. Like exactly. Right. Those stereotypes exist for a reason, because the tribe wants that identity to be part of what's in it.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with having fun with this. Like, there is like that's kind of the thing, is like, you know, you get to choose an aesthetic that appeals to you. And like, this is actually something that I thought was really interesting. I had not finished reading your book. Tanner's got a book, by the way, guys, The Appearance of Power. It's really great. He talks about all this stuff in detail. And I read like 80% of it, and I went back to kind of just, you know, brush up on it before we talked. And you made a really interesting point about taste versus tribe, and about how, like, if you want to stand out, you don't just completely throw away the whole tribal aspect. Is that right?
Right.
You make a slight deviation, but then you maintain your relationship to your tribe. So for example, like, you know, if you're a life insurance salesman or something like that, or, you know, something very more, you know, white collar. You know, if you can't show up, you can't be like, oh, I'm going to be so out there, I'm going to be so individual and wear sweatpants and workout clothes. You know, your customers are going to be like, what the heck?
Exactly.
But you can make slight deviations within that tribe to make sure that you do stand out from the other insurance guys. So it's like maybe you could do something with texture or color or wear something a little bit outside the norm. Is that right? That's the way you do it?
Absolutely. And that's the thing that makes it really fun, because a lot of times as we start to talk about tribes, a lot of guys think, okay, well, that just means I have to conform and I have to remove all of my identity and I just have to dress in a way that means that I fit in and I look like I belong to this tribe. But there's signaling both within the tribe of being able to say, you know, I'm high status or I'm low status, or I actually don't want to be seen as totally identifying with you guys because I don't, and I have an identity that's bigger than this. And so I'm actually blending a bunch of different tribes that I belong to. And so being able to understand and then navigate the idea of tribe and an expectation of this is what our uniform, this is kind of what our aesthetic Overton window is this is allowed, this is not allowed, doesn't mean that you have to conform to all of it. It just gives you a better sense of tools or a system to be able to use, and you can function within that to say, I want to stand out more, that's more beneficial for me, or I want to conform more and that's going to help me accomplish my goals better. But there's no prescription there. You need to then take that and understand what's going to serve you best.
Right. Yeah. And so it's an interesting thing. And honestly, when I first recognized all this stuff, it was very overwhelming to me because I realized that, you know, I had not thought about clothing really at all so much. Like I went to Catholic school my entire life up until I graduated high school. So I had a uniform that whole time. And so I didn't have to think about it. Honestly, I loved having a uniform. And then I went to college and I kind of branched out like real rakish sort of party, odd stuff. But, you know, the reality was it wasn't appropriate for where I was trying to go. And also, none of my clothes fit, which I realized too with your help.
Yeah, that was fun going through your old stuff with you.
Yeah, no, it was bad, and so I was overwhelmed. And so, like, what are the kinds of obstacles? What are the kinds of challenges that people typically face, that guys typically face when they try to start getting a handle on their style?
Certainly, feeling overwhelmed about it is one, especially because without understanding a framework and it's almost like, imagine that you discover everybody else around you is speaking of an additional language, and it's one that you don't have the vocabulary for, you don't understand the grammar, you don't understand the syntax, but you've been making sounds that are in accordance with that language your whole life, and it's either been supporting you or undermining you, and of course that's going to be overwhelming. And so sadly, a lot of guys, what they'll do is they will just take this idea of, okay, I realize that this matters, so I'm going to type up like good men's style on YouTube, and I'm going to go see some of the great guys who are on there, and then I'm just going to emulate what they wear. But they don't recognize that what these guys do isn't necessarily what's good for them, because they're in a different phase of life, or they live in a different part of the world, or they interact with a different tribe, or they have a different archetype. So feeling overwhelmed and then looking for a kind of, I guess, pun intended, one size fits all approach to a solution is a big problem that a lot of guys have. And you see the same thing with, I'm going to buy a subscription box, or I'm going to have my girlfriend or my wife pick out my clothes for me, because chicks get fashion, and the women have very different reasons for dressing than men do. And if most of the time, if a woman dresses you, you'll end up looking cute instead of self-respected, and everything, you know. And so there's this trying to find shortcuts, or allowing that feeling of being overwhelmed to then just kind of cripple them, and then say, okay, I've seen the other side. I've, quote, taken the red pill on this, and I'm going to go back to my other reality of, as long as I don't look like a complete moron, I don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it was for me. It was like overwhelming. I didn't know where to begin. And so that's why I worked with you. And so once you dial in sort of what your tribe is more or less, and what kind of archetypes you're trying to play in, after that point, then the big things that I saw that I had to learn and get good at were understanding what fitting and not fitting was, which is particularly very hard if you have an unusual body type. Like I'm pretty big. I'm like 6'4". I'm fairly muscular. I've got odd proportions, and I realized I can't shop at normal stores. No. And so when you recognize that, it's like, gosh, crap. But then it's also freeing once you find the places you can shop. So it's like that took a long time for me to figure that out. But if you do that work, that's big. And then the other thing, so it's size and then color with complexion. That was that was an eye opener. Can you tell people a little bit about how that works?
Yeah. So basically, and this is one of those things that a lot of guys, this is one of the first things I tackle with my one-on-one clients as we go through my coaching program. And one of the things that I always tell them is, understanding this is supposed to be a tool to help you to eliminate decision fatigue. It's not supposed to be something that paralyzes you because you're so focused on it all the time. But basically, as far as color and complexion and stuff like that goes, the vast majority of us fall either on a warm or on a cool side of the spectrum. You've got a warm or a cool skin tone. And as a result, you should wear warm or cool colors as a way to make your skin and everything look healthier, as opposed to making you look like sallow or jaundiced or sickly or anything else like that. Because one of the things that your clothing should signal, on top of status and all these other kind of bigger tribal communications, is that you're healthy and that you're fit. And that's more of like a biological signal that's being sent. But here, I'll give you guys some free advice. It's one of the things I usually just teach my clients. One of the easiest ways to avoid being overwhelmed when it comes to color is to just focus on, there are 5 both kind of neutral when it comes to what works for your body and what doesn't, but especially like culturally neutral colors that are black, white, gray, brown, and blue. And so 99% of my wardrobe consists within that color palette, so that I don't have to worry about, does that yellow work on me or doesn't? Or is that green too bright? Or is that orange too pastel or chalky or anything else like that? And so color, just like anything else, is one of those things that can be really overwhelming, or it can be really easy to work with. It just depends on how far down that particular rabbit hole you want to go.
Yeah, and it goes surprisingly deep in all the directions, like understanding that, like your contrast, and then your face shape for like what kind of glasses you get. And it's like, I'm not going to ask you to give away all your great information here. People can look into it, but it's more than anything, it was freeing, because I think a lot of the reason, like, why I was biased to just writing off style is because I didn't know how to make decisions. I didn't know how to evaluate whether something was going to work for me or against me. And so it's like, well, clearly style is just stupid because I don't know how it works. And
yeah, it's a total sour grapes attitude, huh?
Yeah, but then once I understood that stuff, I realized that, I could do a lot more with it. And that was really cool. So,
yeah, I mean, how often have you found yourself? I can't tell you how many times I've been on a call with a client, trying to see if he's going to be a good fit for the program before he even signs up. And one of the things that I hear is, I buy things that I love when I see them on the mannequin, or I try them on and I like the way that they look in the store. And then I get home and I put them on again and I hate it. And it just sits in the back of my closet for 3 years until I throw it out.
Right.
One of the most common things I hear, and it's that same thing that you were just saying, where you decide, I'm going to put some effort into this. To some level of conscious or subconscious, I recognize that this matters. I'm going to try, and then I'm going to trust my judgment, because my only measure of feedback right now is, do I like it or do I not like it? And then based on that lighting, based on the bias of, I saw it on the mannequin, based on, the movies that I just watched and how cool the characters looked or anything else like that, I put this on in the mall and I go, I like this. And then you get home a week later and all these variables have changed, and all of a sudden you don't like it and you can't trust yourself anymore. So of course you're going to go back to this idea of, this is stupid. I don't even care. As long as I'm not wearing a stupid like dress or a pink gorilla suit that people don't think I'm an idiot, I'm fine to just look neutral. And it's just because your only measure of progress or success is, do you like it or not? And that's a totally invalid measurement, especially when you don't even know what the other tools are that you should be using to help gauge whether or not you like it.
Right, exactly. It's eye-opening. And if you guys want to see some of this stuff in action, you should go check out Tanner's Twitter. What is it? It's Tanner Guzy. It's just at Tanner Guzy, right?
Yep.
And he does, was the Wednesday something? The Wednesday
weigh-ins.
Wednesday weigh-ins, yeah. He posts a picture and he's like, what do you guys think? What's working in this and what's not? And you can watch people go through and analyze it. And it's really a pretty interesting sort of exercise.
And you'll never see one where everybody likes it.
Right.
Which is a good thing I think for a lot of men to realize too, because a lot of times, especially now where we're in this world that's we live in a cult of niceness. Where it's the highest morality is that I don't offend people, that I make other people feel comfortable, that I'm not polarizing or anything else. And so of course that's going to translate over to our style. And one of our biggest measures of how moral we are is, does everybody like me? Which is really one of the stupidest measurements of if you're a good person or not. But that's what we've been conditioned into believing for the last however many years. And so a lot of guys experience that aesthetically too, is how do I pick something that nobody's ever going to make fun of me for wearing? And the only way to do that is to pick something that nobody's ever even going to notice. If you just totally disappear, nobody's going to make fun of you, but you're also never going to get any of the positive benefits either.
Right. One of the things I'm really trying to internalize is the idea that it's as important to push the wrong people away from you as it is to attract the right people to you.
So liberating.
And when you recognize that, then it's like, yeah, on one hand, I'm trying to make people like me in this, but on the other hand, I'm also kind of trying to piss off those people over there. Yep. And it's interesting. You think about a lot of the strongest brands in the world, like that's kind of what they've done. They're polarizing. They force you to take a position. And when they force you to take a position, even if a big chunk of the population hates it, well, a big part of the population is going to love it then. And, you know,
look at Nike and what they've done with Kaepernick, or what they just did with the Betsy Ross flag. And it's all this marketing and this branding. Or, you know, they just released that Chick-fil-A is now the most beloved fast food chain in America. And it's because they're polarizing, you know? And so those are both really good examples of kind of opposite ends of the political spectrum, and both have the level of success they do because they're not afraid to take a stand and actually stick by their guns on a moral principle.
Right. And, you know, speaking of this kind of like, you know, not being so worried about everyone loving you, and talking about Twitter here, it's like I wanted to talk to you a little bit about being in the masculinity sphere, because I know you're much bigger on Twitter than I am. I intermittently pop on there and then leave. But you've built up quite a following. You've done, you know, different conventions and things like that. What do you think of the masculinity sphere as it exists online today? Because it seems like it's sort of all over the place.
It is. And I think that's one of the things that I had to come to terms with, is that it is a bunch of fellow travelers who have different ideas as far as what's good or what's bad, how men should relate to women, how men should relate to each other, political different leanings, or philosophical, or, you know, you've got neo-reaction and monarchs and tradcons and red pills and all this other stuff. And the only thing that's a common underlying thread that I've been able to find is it's men who are unapologetic about being men, and are doing their best to actively become the best versions of themselves, as opposed to just reactively just responding to the way that the world treats them. And so from that regard, I love being a part of it, especially because that means I can work to carve out my own space of what I think that means morally and tribally and in every other aspect as well.
Yeah. And I would say maybe another thread to it, at least. All right. So, I mean, technically, I guess you could say there's another end to the masculinity sphere, which is like almost like the anti-masculinity sphere. It's the idea that, like, you know, masculinity is bad. It's the patriarchy. You know, the more you can distance yourself from anything manly, the better. I guess that's technically a take in
masculinity, right?
Yeah. I mean, but I'm not talking about them. But everyone on the other side of it, they seem to acknowledge that there are fundamental psychological principles that set men and women apart. Yep. And most people seem to agree on that. You know, it's like, all right, men have this polygamist instinct. Women have this what is it? Hypergamous instinct. And the thing where I see the big distinction then is the conclusions that people come from that, or draw from that. So it's like you got some of the red pillars where it's like, all right, if women are hypergamous, well, then my job is to spin as many plates as I can, to try and basically date and have sex with as many women as I can at the same time, and that's my path to happiness, right? And, you know, I know you are a Christian man, so am I, and I have to see that and be like, man, no, that's not the way to go. And it's right. And it's like it's difficult to navigate that when so many people are willing to immediately write you off, to say that, hey, you're this kind of blue pill normie if you think that you could be happy in a monogamous relationship. Yeah. You know, what do you think of that?
What's sad to me is that a lot of these guys, because when you do go through this kind of red pill, or you enter into the manosphere, the masculine self-development sphere, or whatever we're going to call it next year, because it's always evolving.
Right.
is you go through this kind of resentment and this angry phase of it's like, holy crap, like this whole idea of being part of the cult of niceness, of worshiping on the altars of equality and diversity and everything else, it's really not the reality that everybody presented it to be. And so you do go through this kind of anger phase of it. And sadly, a lot of men continue to remain in that phase, or they get through that to the point where then they become nihilistic because they immediately create this false binary of the tools that I was told to use in order to create a happy monogamous marriage, build a family, have a functioning Western culture and all that. The tools don't get the job done. Therefore, the goal of having a monogamous marriage and a family and a good civilization is an erroneous goal. And that's
right.
It's a weird conflation between the two.
Right. It's interesting. It's like almost, it's as much, it's interesting because a lot of the red pill guys who think like that, they are against kind of identity politics in some regard. They kind of, rail against this idea. But that's what they're doing. They're just doing in the sexual realm. They're reducing men purely to their sexual instinct, that hypergamous, or the hypergamous instinct, or no, sorry, polygamous. I keep screwing that up. And then women purely to their hypergamous instinct. And that's not all you are. Yeah, maybe you have that part. Maybe men do have a natural inclination to want to have multiple sexual partners. Right. But also, we have a natural inclination to eat a lot of Big Macs. Exactly. Does that mean that that's all we are? Why would you the claim that that's all you are is like the claim that like just because I want to eat Big Macs and I have a genetic or evolutionarily predisposition to want that means that that's all I should eat.
Exactly.
It's like no.
And that I'm living to my highest sense of self if that's what I do, is I just have to pursue that.
Right.
Or even more so, that women are incapable of overcoming that instinct themselves. And so the only thing that you can do is be adaptable, because it doesn't matter how good of a woman you think she is, eventually she's going to give into the Big Mac craving, and she's going to blow up her family and destroy everything in her life because she's got to have that Big Mac.
Right. That's the perfect way to put it. Yeah. And it's sad because I think a lot of guys have been burned by that. And that's what a lot of it's coming from. It's coming from, a lot of hurt, a lot of resentment that, they were passed up by women for chasing, higher status guys. And so, women are just these stupid sluts. And so I just need to use them to the best of my ability, or just forget about them, go, whatever that is, like incel or even incel, and just, I'm just a porn addict then.
I'm going to get my waifu that way. Yeah.
Right. And it's not going to work. There's no happiness down that route. It's like the dream of having a loving marriage, a committed marriage, that's something that seems to be treated more and more as a myth. And I know you're a married man, right?
Yep.
Would you say
married
that
with 4 kids?
Yeah. So, I mean, how long have you been married now?
8 years.
That's awesome. And would you recommend it?
Absolutely. I think everybody should do it. I think everybody should do it intelligently. And here's the thing is, I get the benefit of living in somewhat of a self-protected bubble, because as much as biology matters, I believe that the biggest thing that overcomes that, even more so than personal willpower or anything else like that, is culture. And being a Christian, specifically, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most people call us Mormons. And I live in Utah, where this is my culture. I mean, I'm in my home right now, and I can see my neighbors. And every house that's on my neighborhood is couples who are in their early to mid 30s and have an average of like 4 kids apiece under the age of 10. Like, that's the culture that I live in. And yes, I'm sure that there are people who are here in the neighborhood that are not living the way that they're supposed to, but culture is something that can so strongly override these other things. And so if you're the kind of guy who the only culture that you find yourself in is Tinder and bar hopping, maybe you probably shouldn't be getting married until you can find yourself in a different culture and you're around women who are also in that culture, because otherwise you're just playing with fire by saying, I'm going to marry the next girl who swipes right on me.
Right. Exactly. And it's like, by writing women off as saying, they can't develop a greater sense of morality, a greater sense of fidelity, all that kind of stuff. It's also, from what I've seen, a way of giving yourself a pass on your own indulgences.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep. It's just self-justification.
Right. Because if she's like that, well, then who cares if I just sleep around? Who cares if I just watch
Totally
porn
rational
constantly?
for me to just be reactive to that. Why would I try and do anything? I mean, it's not expedient. It's stupid and foolish and naive to be more moral than that.
Right.
Yeah. Which is funny because it's still this idea of being reactive to women, but it's now letting women as a whole, or women as this like biologically hypergamous group that now set the structure and the tone of what morality is, of what civilization is, and everything else. And so you're still pedestalizing womanhood.
Right.
You're just doing it from this other reactive and responsive way, as opposed to, no, I'm going to be a man who's going to build my own way. I'm going to create my own culture. I'm going to find myself attached to a culture that I believe in, and my wife can be along for the ride, and she's going to buy into it if she comes from something and she embraces something that way.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's sad to see a lot of that being rejected. I think there's people are starting to speak up in that regard. Like, it's interesting. It's like, it seems like Christians are always like a few steps behind the culture war in some form or another.
Yeah, it's because we're too busy trying to conserve instead of just building our own thing.
Well, I think that, but also they tend to be doing better, and so they're not so keyed in on it. They don't realize that there's a problem because they're doing okay.
Yeah,
but then
unless you're experiencing it online, you're right. We get the luxury of being in our bubbles or our oases of what we deal with in real life.
Right. And then it's not until someone, reams you out on Twitter for being some kind of horrible person just by having a family and being, heterosexual. It's like, wait, what? When did this become a problem?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's really great to have voices like you in the masculine community who are willing to stand up for, I would call them almost neo-traditional values, because they're traditional values, but they're updated. They're more nuanced, where like in the past, it's like, you're going to get married because that's the way you do it, opposed to, all right, well, no, here are the actual like benefits to it. Here's like an in-depth, nuanced, philosophical take on this approach to life. And I think that matters a lot, because if you can't back it up, what you're presenting these days, especially like on the hardcore philosophical evolutionary level as like a valid path, then it's just going to get eaten up, as it should, because I think we're in an age where bullshit just won't fly for too long.
And I love that. I think that's one of the secret benefits from a Christian perspective of this idea of the world moving away from what our core beliefs were, because 100 years ago it used to be that you just lived according to those principles because that was what everybody did. And it was just this cultural or this familial inertia. And so you're just going through the motions and there wasn't really any meaning to it. And now, in order to live that kind of lifestyle, at some point you have to choose, am I going to be enticed by the world or Babylon or the cathedral or whatever else we're going to call it? Or am I going to choose to embody these morals and these principles? And what's cool is when you choose to do it, that's where the real transformative power comes from. And that's also when you get people who really buy in, as opposed to, I'm just afraid of pissing off my parents, or I've never thought to do anything differently because this is the same way everybody else around me lives. Right,
exactly. It's like the younger me, the guidance I got around sexuality was like, don't masturbate because it's evil, you'll go to hell. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not buying that. This is fucking awesome. And then after like I had tremendous problems and addiction and all this kind of stuff, and I found my way out of it, it's like I could put on, if I end up having a son, I could put on a 3-day seminar literally on why he shouldn't do this. And so it's like, at least I can give context as to why. And the only reason I could do that is because I had to figure it out. I actually had to face the problems. It's like, oh, damn, they figured this shit out centuries ago. They just didn't.
It always goes back to that we're right. Yeah. That's actually one of my favorite things about, I joke around with some of my friends who are in the sphere about this, because there's so many of the things that people talk about, whether it's all these guys who are giving up drinking, or these guys who are, no FAP, or I want to be a family. It's like, you guys are all just becoming Christians without even realizing it. You just have to introduce God as the main reason for doing all this, and the thing that's going to get you through the part that it's really, really hard. But your behaviors are already like on their way to lining up with the rest of us.
My favorite is the idea, like the new theory that reality is just a hologram, and that, or it's just a computer simulation. And I'm like, well, that's literally what almost every single spiritual tradition has been saying for the entire recorded history. And it's like people are acting like it's this brand new theory. I'm like, come on, guys.
It's so funny. We're so cyclical. We just go through the same things over and over again.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I know you got to get going. I think you said you have a daughter's birthday that you got to go celebrate
today. Yep, we're doing pizza and a pool party.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so exciting. My little daughter, she's about to turn 6 months. So
awesome, dude. This is where it starts to get fun. This is where personality and everything starts to come out.
She's like so cute right now. She's man, it's like the character's starting to pop up. Like honestly, and just for anyone who's like, they hear us talking about this and like, oh yeah, I'll never have kids. Like, I didn't think I ever really wanted kids at one point, and then like literally the most joy, the most pleasure I've ever had compared to any drug or any substance or any video game or anything. It doesn't even touch it. It's just like unbelievable. It's like
there's not an ounce of guilt that's tied to it.
Right. Right. It's good stuff, guys. It's worth sacrificing for, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming on, Tanner, and sharing a little bit of your knowledge with us. Where can anyone find you if they want to find out more about what you do?
Absolutely. So first of all, thanks for having me on. I've loved the conversation. It's been really fun. If you guys want to actually learn more about the archetypes and particularly discover which one is your primary one, you can go to masculine-style.com, and I have an archetype quiz there. It's like 7 questions long that you can take, and it'll help you get started with finding out which of those is your primary. My most active social media accounts are Twitter and Instagram, which is at Tanner Guzy. And yeah, those are definitely the best places to find me and interact with me. So yeah. And make sure you check out the links in the description below. We might even be able to set up something here with Tanner in terms of maybe some special discounts or anything. We've got some ideas in the works. Yeah.
So make sure you check in that. And if you don't see anything down there, then make sure you're on my mailing list, because I'll maybe send it out through there too. But awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Tanner. I hope you have a wonderful time with your daughter and your family.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.